The cliff didn't fall because of a storm. There was no earthquake, or no flood. One morning, an entire hillside simply let go and buried hundreds of penguin nests alive. Scientists watching it happen had one thought: this isn't a geology problem. This island wasn't killed by pollution. It wasn't killed by climate change. It was killed, slowly, by every single attempt humans made to save it. Each fix created something worse. Each rescue mission left the island closer to collapse. And the last time people tried to help, they accidentally triggered the biggest ecological disaster the island had ever seen. Here's how a rabbit brought down a mountain. In 2006, I'm a hillside on this island. Just let go. Not a few loose rocks. Not a small slide. An entire slope, thousands of tons of soil. Mud. And rotting vegetation collapsed at once and buried a colony of royal penguins that had been nesting there for generations. These birds nest on the ground. They have nowhere else to go. One moment there were hundreds of breeding pairs. The next, they were gone. Not taken by a predator. Not washed out by a wave. Just buried alive under the island itself. What made this so unsettling wasn't just the scale of it. It was that the island had been a protected nature reserve since 1978. No logging, no mining, no development. By every measure, this was a place humans were supposed to be leaving alone. And yet the land was coming apart. Scientists who studied the erosion patterns found that this wasn't a sudden event. The island had been slowly losing structural integrity since at least the late 1990s. Satellite images showed the vegetation retreating year by year, green slopes turning patchy. Then bare. Then nothing. And on sub-Antarctic terrain like this, that matters more than almost anywhere else on Earth. The soil here isn't anchored by bedrock close to the surface. It sits on steep slopes, held together almost entirely by root systems. Take away the plants, and you don't just lose greenery. You lose the only thing keeping the ground from sliding into the ocean. That's exactly what happened. Winter rains hit bare soil with nothing underneath to hold it. The hillsides didn't erode slowly. They moved. Whole sections gave way at once, taking everything on top of them: nesting sites, burrows, birds straight down the cliff face. So the question wasn't why the land was sliding. That part made sense. Once you understood the physics, the real question was, what had stripped the vegetation off a protected island in the first place? Something had eaten it down to nothing. And that something wasn't the weather. The rain didn't destroy that hillside. The rain just finished the job. The actual culprit was 300,000 rabbits. That number sounds made up. But at their peak, that was the real population living on an island just 49 square miles in size. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the size of a mid-sized city, except instead of buildings and roads, it's all steep slopes, coastal cliffs, and fragile sub-Antarctic soil that took thousands of years to form, and every single inch of it was being eaten, not grazed, eaten. There's a difference. When rabbits graze, they clip the surface. When they reach the densities they reached on this island, they go further. They strip bark, they chew through root systems, they dig. A single rabbit burrow can destabilize a square meter of topsoil. Multiply that by 300,000 animals working around the clock, and you stop having a vegetation problem. You have a structural engineering problem. By the early 2000s, researchers estimated that rabbits had destroyed more than 40% of the island's total plant cover, nearly half the surface. Gone. And on terrain like this, where the soil on steep slopes is held together almost entirely by root networks, losing 40% of your vegetation doesn't mean losing 40% of your stability. It means losing most of it. The parts that were left were barely holding on. One wet winter was enough to start the collapse. Here's what made it so hard to see coming. Rabbits aren't predators. They're not aggressive. They don't attack. They just eat. Quietly. Constantly. Everywhere at once. There's no dramatic moment when you realize what's happening. The damage accumulates underground, out of sight. Until one day, a hillside that looked perfectly fine from above simply slides away. But here's what didn't add up. This island is not a comfortable place to live. It's cold. It's windy. It gets battered by storms rolling in from the Southern Ocean. It's not the kind of environment where any animal should be thriving to the point of ecological collapse. A rabbit population doesn't reach 300,000 on a hostile sub-Antarctic island unless something is missing. Something that should have been keeping them in check. And whatever that something was, it was gone. The question was why. The answer, it turns out, was cats. By the late 1990s, researchers had documented something deeply disturbing. The feral cat population on the island had grown large enough to kill an estimated 60,000 seabirds every single year. 60,000 petrels, prions, shearwaters, birds that had nested on this island for millions of years, completely defenseless against a predator they had never evolved to recognize. The data was unambiguous. The cats had to go, so they went. Over the course of a systematic eradication campaign, wildlife teams removed nearly 2,500 feral cats from the island. By around 2000, the cat population was gone, and for a moment, it genuinely felt like a win. Seabird numbers started stabilizing. The colonies that had been decimated began showing signs of recovery. People who had worked on this for years finally had something to celebrate. But here's what nobody fully accounted for. Cats are messy, opportunistic predators. They don't specialize. When seabird numbers dropped and became harder to hunt, the cats had been supplementing their diet with rabbits. Not enough to drive the rabbit population down dramatically, but enough to keep a ceiling on it. Enough to maintain a kind of accidental, unintentional balance that nobody had designed and nobody had named. When the cats disappeared, that ceiling disappeared with them, and rabbits, freed from the only pressure that had been holding them back. It did exactly what rabbits do when nothing is stopping them. They reproduced fast. A rabbit population can double in as little as 6 weeks under favorable conditions. On an island with no remaining predators and a surface covered in vegetation, conditions were about as favorable as they get. Within a few years, the population that had been kept in rough check exploded to 300,000 animals. The same 300,000 that would spend the next decade methodically stripping the island bare and setting up the landslides that buried penguin colonies in 2006. The scientists had solved the cat problem completely and correctly, by every measure they were using, but the system they were operating inside was larger than the problem they were solving. They had pulled one thread, and the whole thing unraveled, which raises the obvious question: where did the cats come from in the first place, and the rabbits, and everything else that turned this island into a slow-motion disaster? That story starts much earlier, and it starts with a ship. None of the animals that caused this disaster were native to the island. Not the cats, not the rabbits, not the rats. Before 1810, this place had no land mammals at all. None. And that wasn't a problem. It was actually the reason the ecosystem worked so well. Seabirds had been nesting here for millions of years, digging burrows into the soft ground, laying eggs in the open, raising chicks with no instinct to hide or flee. Because there had never been anything here to hide from. The island was a paradise precisely because nothing on it was trying to eat anything else on the ground. Then the seal hunters arrived. They weren't trying to destroy anything. They were just after the seals, which were profitable, and the island had plenty of them, but their ships carried stowaways. Rats had been traveling aboard wooden vessels for centuries. They found the food stores. They found the warmth. It's found the gaps in the hull. And when a ship anchored near shore, they found their way onto land. By the time anyone noticed, the rats were already breeding, and the birds, with no memory of predators across generations. It had no defense. Their eggs were sitting in holes in the ground. The rats just walked in. So people brought cats. That made sense. Cats kill rats. Rats were the problem. Problem solved. Except the cats didn't stay focused on rats. They never do. And then in 1878, someone released rabbits onto the island, following a practice common at the time, leaving livestock on remote islands so that sailors shipwrecked nearby would have something to eat. A practical idea, well-intentioned, catastrophic in hindsight. 3 decisions, 3 species that didn't belong. Rats that arrived by accident, cats that were brought to fix that accident, and rabbits that were brought for an entirely separate reason. None of the people involved were thinking about the island as a system. They were each solving the problem directly in front of them, and each solution planted the seed of the next disaster silently, invisibly. Across decades, nobody was watching the whole board, and by the time anyone started looking at the full picture, more than a century of damage had already accumulated beneath the surface. By 2007, the people responsible for this island had learned one very expensive lesson. You cannot fix a broken ecosystem by removing one piece at a time. Every time they had tried that cats to deal with rats, then eradicating cats to save birds, something else exploded out of control. The system always found a way to redistribute the pressure, so this time, the approach had to be completely different. The Australian government approved $15 million for a single, coordinated eradication campaign targeting all 3 invasive species simultaneously: rabbits, rats, and mice, all of them, all at once. Not in sequence, not one after the other. The entire operation had to run as a single strike, because leaving any one species in place would simply allow it to fill the vacuum left by the others. They had seen that movie before. They weren't going to watch it again. The first phase was aerial. Over 2 consecutive winter seasons, helicopters flew systematic grid patterns across the entire island, dropping Brodifacum bait stations across every accessible surface. Winter was chosen deliberately. The native seabirds were at sea during those months, which meant the poison could blanket the land without killing the animals the campaign was trying to protect. The baiting runs covered the full 49 square miles, including the steep coastal cliffs where ground crews couldn't safely operate. Then came the virus. Rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus, also called Kalisa virus, was introduced to knock down the surviving rabbit population that the bait hadn't reached. It spreads between rabbits on contact, it moves fast, and doesn't affect other species. It was already being used in Australia for rabbit control on the mainland. Here, it became the second layer of pressure on an animal that had proven almost impossible to fully eliminate through poison alone. But the third phase is the one that stays with you. 12 detection dogs, each trained to find live rabbits by scent alone, were deployed across the island in rotating teams. These weren't search and rescue dogs working in familiar terrain. They were working across subantarctic rock faces, waterlogged tussock grass, and cliff edges battered by Southern Ocean wind, hunting animals that had learned to hide in the deepest, most inaccessible pockets of the island. By the time the campaign ended, those 12 dogs had collectively covered more than 56,000 miles of terrain, roughly the equivalent of circling the Earth twice to track down the last holdouts. The final confirmed sighting of a live invasive animal on the island was recorded in 2014 after 7 years of sustained, coordinated effort. Macquarie Island was declared completely free of all 3 species. Not probably clear, not largely clear, completely. For the first time in over 2 centuries, nothing on that island was eating something that evolution hadn't prepared it for. 10 years after the last invasive animal was removed, the satellite imagery of Macquarie Island showed something researchers hadn't dared predict on that timeline. The vegetation was coming back. Not patchy regrowth in isolated spots broad. Continuous recovery across slopes that had been bare mud just a decade earlier. The root systems were reestablishing. The soil was holding again. The hillsides that had collapsed in 2006 were slowly knitting themselves back together. The royal penguin colonies are recovering. Albatrosses and petrels have returned to nesting sites that were abandoned for so long that some researchers had written them off entirely. And something quieter is happening too. Something that took scientists a while to fully appreciate. As seabird populations rebuild, the volume of guano bird droppings depositing on the island's soil has increased dramatically. That might sound like an odd thing to celebrate, but guano is one of the richest natural fertilizers on Earth. It's been the primary nutrient driver of island ecosystems like this one for millions of years. More birds mean more guano, which means richer soil, which means taller, denser vegetation, which means better cover for nesting birds, which means more birds. The system is rebuilding itself from the inside out, through mechanisms that no human intervention could replicate or accelerate. But here's the thing that the people managing this island understand very clearly: the island is not saved. It is protected. There is a difference. Every researcher, every visitor, every piece of equipment that sets foot on Macquarie Island today goes through biosecurity screening before they're allowed anywhere near the shore. Detection dogs inspect bags, boots, clothing, and gear. The protocols are the kind of thoroughness you'd expect at an international border. Not a remote island most people have never heard of, because the people responsible for this place know exactly what one